All right, we are going to go ahead and get started. To be cognizant of your time, welcome to How the Pandemic Has Changed the Future of Travel, presented by the Rice Traveling Owls and the Office of Alumni Relations. My name is Shannon Burnett, and I am the Assistant Director with Alumni Programs in charge of the Traveling Owls portfolio. And before I turn it over to Dan Stypa for his fabulous presentation, I wanted to provide some friendly Zoom reminders. So we ask that you keep your audio on mute unless you are speaking to cut down on any background noise. Dan is going to leave time for questions at the end, but if you think of any questions while he's presenting, you're welcome to write those in the chat, and we'll make sure we circle back to get you an answer. And you're welcome to have your video on at any point during the presentation, as we would love to see your smiling faces, but please know that's not required. And now I'd like to introduce Dan Stypa from Orbridge. Dan serves as the Director of Sales for Orbridge, and some of you may remember him from his over 8 years at Rice, where he worked in the Alumni Relations Office and managed the Traveling Owls portfolio. Now with Orbridge for over a year, Dan manages over a third of partnerships Orbridge has with alumni associations and other nonprofit organizations throughout the East Coast, Southeast, Texas, and West Coast regions. Dan serves on Orbridge's senior leadership team and has been involved with program and strategy development as Orbridge has navigated through the disruptions that the COVID crisis has caused, and Orbridge begins to restart travel. Dan, take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Shannon. And I think I have myself unmuted and everything, so we should be good to go. Awesome. Thanks so much. Well, happy Out Together and Homecoming Week to everyone. It's so great to see so many familiar names and faces joining us this afternoon for this talk about travel. And for those of you who may not have traveled with Rice or with the Traveling Owls program, welcome. And again, this is a talk about just kind of the broader landscape of travel. So this isn't, you're not going to hear about certain tours or anything like that, but instead kind of the 50,000-foot view of how the pandemic has changed the future of travel. And so, as Shannon said, my name is Dan Stypa. I serve as the Director of Sales and Partner Relations for Orbridge. So we are a tour operator that is based outside of Seattle that works exclusively with alumni associations, nonprofits, museums, zoos, and aquariums for educational small group travel. And so the information that I'll be sharing with you today is broadly applicable to all types of travel. There are a few things that I'll kind of call out that may or may not look different or feel different if you were to travel with a group, but I thought it would be important that as we have had this kind of global pause in travel to think about how it has impacted it currently and where we'll be moving towards in the future. And so I thought this quote was really poignant to me that I think a lot of us can resonate to. So the UN Secretary General indicated that tourism allows people to experience the world's cultures, riches, and brings people closer together, highlighting our common humanity. And because of that, one might say that tourism is indeed one of the wonders of the world. And that's why it's been so painful to see how tourism has been devastated by the COVID pandemic. And so with that being said, I think a lot of you on here today, whether you travel independently or with the Traveling Owls or experience the world in your own way, I think we would all agree that travel and being able to experience the cultures and the people of different places all around the world is really one of the highlights of being able to travel. And it goes without saying that so many during this pandemic have been impacted, especially here in Houston. Hopefully all of you on the session today have been healthy and that you haven't been too significantly impacted. And so it is certainly understood that all industries and all sectors of our way of life really have been impacted. But certainly tourism, hospitality, and travel have been one of the most significantly impacted industries. And so prior to the pandemic, tourism actually accounted for faster growth than the world economy for the past 10 years. And so the pandemic, because of that growth and how fast it was happening in the tourism and travel industry, it has had almost an immediate and overnight impact on the tourism industry. So the latest projections are indicating that there will be anywhere from about a 60 to 80% decline in the overall international tourist numbers from just last year to this year. And that accounts for generally close to or a little more than 1 billion tourists. And so I know that my work at Orbridge and being in close communication with Shannon throughout all of this, of course, the traveling owls and other types of programs are impacted. But when you think about the scale and the magnitude of the COVID pandemic, it really, to think about 1 billion people's travel plans having been impacted and no longer being able to experience the riches of our world is understandably and unarguably a significant impact. And one of the areas within the travel industry that will experience this impact the most are smaller developing countries and states where tourism does account for a higher percentage of their gross domestic product. So think about if you have been to Tanzania before, how much tourism helps the local community, how much the visiting of the local schools, or think about if you were on a trip where the rich cultural immersion is so important. Those are the aspects that sometimes we don't think about as being directly impacted by tourism, but those really are the areas and the aspects of travel that are being impacted. In particular, women and young people. You think about the last trip you were on potentially, and there were the markets, or there were the handicrafts being created that were being provided and sold to tourists. Those types of industries that don't have the backing of the global hotel chains or the global cruise lines or airlines, those local families and individuals are arguably bearing a significant brunt of this pandemic travel slowdown. And so a few more kind of high level statistics about travel and the COVID's impact on it. There is expected to be approximately a $1 trillion loss in the export revenue from international tourism. Already in the first few months of 2020, since the pandemic started, there's already been a $320 billion loss. And that accounts for more than 3 times the loss that was experienced during the entire 2009 economic crisis. And so a lot of travel companies, whether it's individual hotels, tour operators like Orbridge, airlines, we've weathered storms like this, whether it has been economic crises, whether it has been global events such as 9/11. But the difference between those types of events and something like COVID is not only is COVID continuing to impact us for an extended period of time, but then the perceptions and the feeling of safety and wanting additional flexibility is not, even when there might be a vaccine or a cure for COVID, the travel industry is expecting that the impacts of COVID will be felt long after kind of the quote unquote end of COVID-19. And so, as I was talking a little bit about on this slide earlier, the job market the jobs that are reliant on tourism have been significantly impacted. So you can look at the money, you can look at the impact on the GDP, but to think about almost 120 million jobs around the world, those are at risk because of the COVID-19 impact. So the impact on the individual is significant. And I think that that is something that gets lost in what's the narrative that is we sometimes think about when it comes to travel. We think about the large companies, the kind of the ambiguous travel, but the people are the ones bearing the brunt of this. And so the expected reduction in global GDP as a result of this entire pandemic as of now is 1.5% to almost 3%. And again, that varies depending on how long tourism essentially is at a standstill. So the longer that we are all dealing with COVID, understandably, is the longer that the impacts and the more significant and severe the impacts will be. So this graph that I have here on the screen, and it might be hard to see if you don't have it on if you don't have the Zoom platform on full screen, but you can see over the course of from May until just about a week ago, America's state of mind when it comes to their readiness to travel. So the blue line at the top of this indicates the percentage of Americans, according to destination analysts, that are ready to travel. And ready to travel means that they are ready to start their travel, not necessarily thinking about travel, but those who are ready to be on a trip right now. So about 55% of Americans are ready to travel right now, and about 45% of Americans are not ready to travel. And you'll see there's a general upward increase in the percentage of Americans who are ready to travel, which is great to see. And then there's a gradual decline of those who are not ready to travel. One thing you'll notice, of course, is that there are ebbs and flows in this. And so on the next slide, you'll see that even though it's a steady increase in those who are ready to travel and a relatively steady decrease in those who are not ready to travel, another wave of COVID-19, there isn't necessarily as strong of an impact on people's perception of safety at this time. And so while every time there's another hotspot that develops in the world, or what we're seeing in the news right now, especially in Europe, that certainly impacts travelers' readiness. And so there has been that decrease. So it had peaked at almost 60%, and now it's down to 55. But all things considered, from the beginning of the pandemic to where we are now, what we're starting to see is a bit of more of an evening out, that the waves of COVID infections, the hotspots that are developing, aren't having an immediate either negative impact or an immediate positive impact on those open and ready to start traveling. And so on this next slide that you'll see, this is something that is really telling, especially if you maybe have done a little bit of traveling so far on your own. The top line on this graph shows those who are already traveling. And so this means those who have done anything away from home that involves an overnight stay. So maybe it's going to a loved one, maybe it's renting an Airbnb in the hill country, or maybe it is going on a full-scale tour. So you'll see that those who have traveled, they are their confidence in traveling is 50% higher than the average American. So what this shows is that those who have done something related to travel, like I said, whether it's a one-night stay somewhere or you've gone on a tour, that significantly impacts one's level of confidence when it comes to travel. And later on, I'll show some photos from firsthand experience of being on the road that helps understand and make sense of why there is such a big difference between those who have and have not yet traveled. So now thinking about just our own short term. So obviously, as we're kind of wrapping up October, heading into November and December, this holiday season is probably on a lot of our minds. And with holidays comes travel. And so when we think about the pandemic that we've been dealing with since March until where we are today, of course, vacations, business travel, business conferences have all been impacted and disrupted. But when we look at it on the micro level of our own personal plans for the holidays, about 72% of Americans report not traveling. And so the reasons for not traveling, as you would imagine, and it would, especially for a talk like this, is that they are related to COVID. And so fear is the number one influencer as to why folks who are not planning to travel are deciding not to. So over about half of those folks are fearful of COVID. And then the next kind of group of factors involve the health and safety of themselves and those that they'll be around. And so wanting to make sure that they are being healthy, that they are taking precautions, but then also those that they may be visiting are not negatively impacted by their visit there. And so with those who are planning to travel, the reports are showing that they'll take about 2.5 trips on average, and about 35% will be traveling on air. And I would love, either during the Q&A or in the chat box that we have here, if you have traveled, share that with us. It would be really telling to see, and interesting as we kind of think about heading into the holidays, how many of you have personally been impacted on that. And then that last bullet on here, and this is something that we've seen continuing to grow. So as we have been dealing with the pandemic for an extended period of time, more and more travelers who will be on the road are planning to test themselves for COVID. And so the idea of a shared responsibility for one's health and the health of those that they will be with is continuing to grow. And one would argue that the greater access to testing and in some areas of the country not having to have symptoms for testing is motivating individuals to incorporate COVID testing into their travel planning. And so what I'm going to do now is kind of look at 3 major aspects of tourism. So air travel, hotel, and cruise travel. But I'm going to start with air travel. And especially for those of us who are here in Houston, with United Airlines being a hub here, we know and have probably dealt with firsthand the impact of COVID on air travel. And so almost overnight, there was an incredible drop in air travel. It has been gradually increasing over the past few months, which is nice to see, but it's still nowhere near where travel was at this point last year. So as individuals start thinking about travel, as of just a couple weeks ago, the introduction of protocols when it comes to air travel have a significant impact on those who feel comfortable traveling. So the top 3 infographics on this slide indicate the highest impact on those feeling comfortable traveling. So the top 2 are social distancing and the face masks. And so if you have traveled, or even if you haven't, you've probably heard that when it comes to air travel, all of the airlines are requiring face coverings, introducing some element of social distancing, whether it's in the boarding process, some airlines still keeping certain seats vacant on the planes, but those 2 are kind of the top in terms of what provides comfort and peace of mind, followed closely after those by screenings, temperature checks, and COVID testing. And so what we're seeing is that when there are protocols and precautions put into place, at the beginning of the pandemic, there was a general sense that protocols were a hindrance and were almost thought of as scary. And while they are certainly not what we're used to prior to COVID-19, the research and self-reported data indicate that those are, while they are quote unquote different or scary, they're actually having a significant positive impact on getting folks to think about travel again. And so on this slide, you'll see that on the left or on the right-hand side of the screen are some photos that I took from my personal travel when I was at the Houston Bush Intercontinental Airport a couple months ago. And so air travel is not expected to rebound until at least 2024. And again, these types of stats are all kind of based off of current data. The longer that COVID continues to impact us all, the longer that these impacts may be felt. But based off of current trends, the air industry isn't expecting the capacity or the numbers of travelers to rebound in for at least another 3 to 4 years. And an exciting kind of element or glimmer of good news in all of this is that for the first time just about a week ago, the TSA saw over 1 million air travelers. And so while that is fantastic, for perspective's sake, that same day on October 18th last year, there were over 2.5 million travelers. And so even with these precautions that have been put into place and with modifications all along the travel supply chain, there is still obviously a drastic decline compared to last year on that same day. And so some of the changes that you can experience or expect to experience include, as I said, the face coverings. And so from the point of entry into airport all the way until the point of leaving the airport upon your destination, those face coverings are required. Along with that, on board the plane, you will notice the changes in boarding processes. And so a lot of airlines these days, for the time being, are boarding the planes from back to front to minimize the number or the people that are having to walk right next to you while you're on the plane. And the same goes with disembarking off of the plane upon arrival, is that while it's the flight attendants on the flights that I've been on, and what is being encouraged is that you do it row by row. Of course, you kind of have everyone who stands up and starts grabbing for their carry-ons and everything, but it's being encouraged to disembark planes row by row. And then some airlines are blocking seats, and so that might be the middle seat or just an overall percentage capacity reduction, but that will start to lessen. And so you may have seen in the news within the past few days, Southwest Airlines, for example, they are no longer officially blocking middle seats beginning December 1st. And so while there were a decent number of airlines who were engaging in that, the seat blocking, that is something that will start to diminish, partially due to the fact that there are less flights. And so as you think about going into the new year, going into holiday travel season, less and less seats will be blocked. But then once you're on the plane and in the airport, you will notice a reduction in services. So lounges may not be open if you have access to those. The amount of concession stands or shops and restaurants in airports are reduced, if not actually potentially even with reduced hours, if not altogether closed. But then also on the plane itself, even in the deluxe first classes or business classes, those areas of the cabin, as well as economy or the economy plus sections, are all experiencing reduced services. So having a sealed water bottle and one snack, for example. And so you won't see, if you haven't yet traveled, when you do start again, you'll notice that that onboard experience while on the plane does feel and look a bit different. And so now thinking about another aspect of the travel industry, so hotels and accommodations. And so similarly to air travel, the recovery to pre-COVID-19 levels is not expected to happen until at least 2023. The reason that it's a little bit earlier for hotels compared to airlines is because there is a general thought that leisure travel will return sooner than business travel. I'm sure all of us here on today's webinar, and this is a testament to that fact, that there are more and more virtual meetings, Zoom business meetings, and things like that. And so business travel will be an element of the travel industry that resumes a bit slower. So leisure travels will still, you may drive somewhere, but still need a place to stay. And so that is why the thought is that hotels and accommodations will come back a little bit sooner to pre-COVID levels than what airlines may experience. But even with that, this year and into next year, the what the hotel industry calls the revenue per available room is going to drop over 50%. And so basically what that means is that hotel occupancy and the revenue that's generated from those rooms is less than half of what it was prior to COVID, kind of taking its grip on the travel industry. But once you are in a hotel, you will see modifications. And so the photo on the top right-hand side of the screen, you'll see a photo of a clean seal. So this was from when I was at a hotel just a couple of weeks ago, a photo that it gives the traveler peace of mind that there hasn't been anyone in there. So it's a little hard to tell probably with the size, but it's basically a seal that's on the door itself and the door jamb. And so it's in one piece. So you know that once it's been cleaned and sanitized, no one else has been in that room. But then throughout the hotel, the experience feels and looks a bit different. And so that bottom photo that I took was right outside of an elevator. And so promoting social distancing, limiting the capacity in confined spaces such as elevators, And then another element of the travel industry is cruise travel. And so cruise travel is potentially one aspect of the travel industry that has kind of had the worst PR when it comes to travel. And so COVID has impacted that cruise industry, but with cruise travel, about 3/4 of cruise travelers still want to travel. And that's similar to what it was pre-COVID. And so what the industry is finding, the Cruise Line International Association, is that cruisers want to experience the full cruise experience, but they are ready to make some compromises. So they don't want to just sit in their cabin isolated or sit in a little pod somewhere, but they understand that there are compromises and precautions that will need to take place. And so following protocols, so again, similar to other modes of transportation or in our daily life, but to make sure that they and others around them are safe. And then the Return to Sail program is being developed by the Cruise Line International Association. And this is a series of 74 guidelines and recommendations to help restart and resume cruise travel. So even here in Texas, for example, down here in Galveston, the city has been significantly impacted by the pause in cruise travel. And so the leadership of most of the major cruise lines have worked together with this professional organization to help put into place recommendations so that when the ability to start cruising is available, that there will be precautions. And so a significant element of the Returning to Sail program will feature, or focus on, I should say, the prevention and elimination of COVID on ships in general. But at the same time, recognizing that should there be a case or should something happen while on board the cruise ship, that there needs to be a mobilization and a reaction plan put into place. And so when you do start to travel by cruise ship, if that's your preferred way of traveling, you'll notice, even if you go to websites right now, what those protocols look like that they are planning to implement when they are able to get back on the high sea. And so I know a lot of what I've been sharing hasn't been the most uplifting. I know a lot of Rice alumni are intrepid, intellectually curious. They want to be able to experience the world and those that live around them. But with all of what I've shared, there is some good news, and that is, of course, that travel is possible. And so on these next few slides that I will be showing are some photos from a recent tour. So there are companies out there, including my own Orbridge, that we have been able to resume select domestic tours. And so what you'll start to see when you are traveling, and again, this is going to be kind of consistent across the board. So again, this is not a plug for Orbridge or anything like that, but as you start thinking about in your own personal spheres of travel and travel readiness, what that experience might look like. So especially if you are traveling with others or on a group, you'll see smaller tour sizes. And so prior to COVID-19, these types of motor coaches that held 50 or 60 individuals would be packed full. That's not the case anymore. And that's going to be something that continues throughout into next year, and even once there are vaccinations or cures available, because the travel industry as a whole realizes and recognizes that it will take a while for individuals to feel kind of completely comfortable with the idea of group travel again. And so you'll find that on these motor coaches, for example, that there's going to be plenty of room for social distancing and for you to spread out. And the same when you are on tour. So the photo on the right-hand side of your screen is from a welcome event when folks are just kind of arriving, filling out some administrative paperwork. But you'll see that there are very few chairs per table. The tables themselves are spread out, and there aren't that many in that room. So I took this photo from the back corner of the room, so it's a little hard to tell from the perspective, but this room would typically hold about 100 to 115 or so, but it was set up for 25. And so this helps kind of put into perspective how much social distancing will impact and be in place on these different experiences. And then on this slide are some of the different again, kind of the evolution, we call it, of that on-tour experience. And so face coverings, as we all have been experiencing in our own backyards, are something that even if not kind of mandated by local or state governments where you might live, they are expected on this type of travel. And so when you are visiting either independently or with fellow travelers, especially when you're inside places, you will see that there is an expectation for travelers to wear face coverings. And that's also for those guides that you may have. So the young woman who's standing on that wooden box, who is kind of the guide of our group while we were at this archaeological dig site, has a face covering, carrying hand sanitizer and disinfectant wipes. But with that, there, again, another glimmer of kind of exciting news or hope is that group tours do allow for more private experiences now. And so while in the past you may, if you were traveling, be in the midst of a lot of tourists at a particular site, when you travel with a group, with like the Traveling Owls, for example, a benefit of that is that these now include more private experiences. And so our group was able to be at this archaeological dig site before it opened to the public. So then that way, to kind of foster the idea of a travel bubble, you may have heard, that is something that is emerging, whether it's between countries, between states, between different geographic areas. And so in a very small scale during group travel, we really do try to ensure that the group travelers are together without others as much as possible. Here are some photos of traveling while outdoors. And so this was in the national parks, and in particular at Mount Rushmore and at Yellowstone. And so if you've been on Traveling Owls trips, or if you have taken any other type of educational travel, you know that a strong component of that are lectures and presentations, so that it can really bring to life what you're seeing and experiencing. And so more and more of that will be happening outdoors. And so the left-hand side of your screen shows our group of travelers with our former park ranger giving a talk about Mount Rushmore at Mount Rushmore. This is something that previously would have been done at the hotel in the morning, kind of over a breakfast session. And so now we take advantage of outdoor spaces whenever possible to kind of minimize as many shared indoor spaces as possible. On the right-hand side of the screen is another example of the impacts of COVID on travel. And so this was at Yellowstone. In the summer, or in a general summer, there's about 3.5 million tourists who visit the national parks. Right now, in talking with the former park ranger, he estimates that travel is about 50% of that right now. And so when our group was there in the middle of July, which is one of the most crowded times at Yellowstone, you can see just by this photo, aside from our group, there really weren't many people there that we were having to kind of make our way through or meander through crowds. And so for those of you who are able to travel, who are ready to start experiencing the world, whether independently or with others, you will experience and find out firsthand that the crowds are less than what you would expect. And so this is, if you're ready and able, a really good time to travel with the precautions in place. So now we've kind of talked about the COVID's impacts on travel currently, what that on-tour experience looks like if you were to travel right now. But now I want to just kind of wrap up with some future trends that you'll see. And again, this is broadly speaking. This isn't necessarily just for a group tour, but as you think about travel and restarting it when you're ready, is that the first thing that you'll notice is that there will be increased flexibility in all elements of the travel supply chain. So whether that is with the airlines, and as you may probably know, a lot of them have eliminated change fees. And so while even if you cancel, you may be subject to certain fees, a lot of airlines now give you the flexibility and the freedom to change your plans with no charge if you need to. Same with hotels, cruise lines, that if you book travel and leading up to it, you're not comfortable traveling, that you're able to make adjustments to your plans, either through changes or cancellations. But also this applies to like tour operators. So if you are someone who has traveled with the Traveling Owls or with other groups, you'll start to see that the tour operators used by those groups are providing a flexibility. And so whether that is reducing cancellation penalties, allowing you to transfer to a different departure date, because the travel industry wants you as the traveler to feel as comfortable and have as much peace of mind as possible. And so that's the first trend that you're starting to see and will be here for the long haul. The next one, as you can probably imagine, is the commitment to enhanced sanitation protocols. And so one of the things, as I've been involved with some kind of professional association level conversations, is that these are not something that are going to be in place. And then once kind of things resume back to quote unquote normal, will be kind of put on hiatus. What you're seeing now in terms of your hotel rooms being sanitized at a deeper level, the level of sanitation on and disinfecting on airlines, cruise ships, those will all be in place for the foreseeable future in order to make sure that travelers, like I said, have that peace of mind in health and their well-being. And then lastly, what we're seeing is the evolution of that preferred destination. And so especially with Rice alumni and similar types of educated travelers who want to experience the globe with like-minded individuals to kind of be immersed in different cultures and traditions, what we're starting to see is that closer to home travel, those are what's going to rebound first, and primarily those destinations that include time outdoors. And so just thinking about the national parks, for example, the names and the faces that I recognize on this afternoon's session, a lot of you have traveled to places like Ulaanbaatar or to Beijing or to Cairo, and those will come back, and we're starting to see them come back, but not nearly as fast as those areas that are in our own backyard that maybe were lower on your bucket list. And so in a way, COVID-19 has afforded an opportunity for travelers across the country to look at what's in their own backyard. And so those types of destinations are what's going to rebound first. And as I said, outdoors, but also those that are less crowded. And you'll start to see an evolution, even on cruise line itineraries, that while there certainly will be visits to populated cities, no one's ever going to stop going to Rome or to Paris. But you will start to see some smaller towns and villages included on the itinerary. So then that way it helps to kind of ease the strain on densely populated areas. But then that last point on here is something that we are seeing kind of industry-wide from travelers as they think about where they might want to go, which was typically not a consideration prior to COVID-19, which is ease of access to healthcare facilities. And so as individuals start thinking about where they want to go once they feel ready, we are finding that travelers are taking it upon themselves now to look at the cities on their itinerary or cities that they're considering visiting to see, are there hospitals there? Are there clinics that are available in the, heaven forbid you do get sick or need healthcare access? And so all of that combined is really kind of helping to evolve what the preferred destination looks like for travelers. And so with all of that, that kind of paints a landscape of how COVID has impacted travel, where we are today, and where we look to go in the future. And so with that, I will be happy to answer questions, and Shannon will get a copy of this presentation as well that has links to all of the resources where this information comes from. So if you wanted to dive into some independent research, those will all be clickable links that you can kind of dive into as well. But with that, I will end my spiel, and Shannon and I will entertain questions that may have come in, or if you haven't yet submitted them, you're able to do so. So with that, Shannon.
Yeah, we had about 4 or 5 questions that came through the chat. For those of y'all that asked those, you're welcome to take yourselves off mute and ask Dan directly if there was any background information you wanted to apply to that question. If not, I'm happy to read on your behalf. We did have quite a few that came from some of those percentage numbers early on in your presentation. Mm-hmm. When you were talking about the ready numbers and the confidence numbers. And so Mary asked, what was the ready percentage pre-COVID?
Great question, Mary. I will have to look into what it was prior to COVID, since this really we kind of looked at from COVID on. I will need to look to see prior to any COVID stuff even happening, what the ready percentage was before the world started dealing with this.
And then Jim was surprised at the decline you had mentioned. And I think this was right before you were talking about the ready percentage, was only 60 to 80% in travel. And so he was just wondering what sort of recreational travel is going on.
Great question, Jim. And so if you were on for probably the last few slides, you saw some from the national parks, for example. And so while numbers are down in the national parks and similar types of sites and attractions, those parks are still going on. We are seeing that there are, whether it's state, national parks, we're seeing those, but then also as especially from about midsummer on, museums. And so with social distancing, face covering was being required, that museum visits are starting to trend a bit more upwards compared to what they were earlier in the pandemic. So those are just a few examples of recreational travel that's still happening.
And then John has asked, how has the cost and value of travel insurance changed this year?
Great question, John. And so costs generally, and I will preface this by saying I am not a licensed travel insurance agent, and so I'm not able to dive into too many specifics, but kind of from a very broad sense, the cost of travel insurance itself hasn't generally changed that much. But the value has gone significantly up, especially if you have cancel for any reason coverage. And so cancel for any reason coverage generally allows the traveler to, just what that entails, to cancel their travel for any reason that they want. And so that arguably is part of the future trend as you kind of think about one's ability and readiness to travel, is that a lot more travelers, even if they are healthy, even if they've never really considered travel insurance in the past, are now looking at the cancel for any reason coverage. Because even with airlines, tour operators, hotels, cruise lines providing more flexibility, at the end of the day, if you are wanting to recoup, if you just want to cancel and you have no intention of future travel, that's when that cancel for any reason coverage does have a lot of value to the traveler. So cost really hasn't changed that much, but the individual's value that travel insurance provides has gone up. It's great to see. It looks like some folks, as I've pulled up the chat box, have made some trips, which is really great to see. It looks like a lot of them are driving trips, those types of experiences, which is certainly what one would expect for the most part, with kind of takeout food or kind of cooking meals at home. So kind of more of those community experiences within your small group. So that's really great to see, that there are some who are traveling again, although albeit potentially different than maybe what it was before.
Are there any other questions? I think I got most of the ones in the chat, but send me a chat if I miss one. Are there any other questions that you want? You can take yourself off mute and just ask Dan directly.
And I see one more in here that the confidence numbers that Jim asks. And so these are all US based. And so the confidence numbers for US within US, or if I'm understanding your question right, the stats and the percentages are all for US travelers. And so it's not kind of a global snapshot, but instead here in our own country. And again, as Shannon said, if there are questions, one just came in regarding, there's still many. Yes, Allison, you are correct. There are, as of right now, still a decent number of countries that are not permitting US travelers right now. And along those lines, what we're finding in the industry is that a lot of these decisions are kind of made on a rolling basis, which to be very transparent, is difficult for the travel industry because some countries are reviewing these every 2 weeks or so, and it's not, and understandably why decisions aren't being made further out in advance or anything like that. But sometimes there might be a country who says in 2 weeks, visitors from US or other countries are able to travel and visit their country again. But yeah, as of right now, there are still many countries that are not permitting US travelers. What we're hopeful and optimistic of is that come 2021, that will start to change, if not beforehand, especially once you get into Q2 of 2021. So thinking about April and beyond, especially when it comes to group travel, where there are a few more restrictions in place, that's where we kind of start to see the real kind of, to use a cliche, kind of the light at the end of the tunnel. So kind of April and beyond is what we're kind of seeing and hoping will allow more visitors. I think, at least from what I'm seeing, Shannon, that looks like it cover most of everything. But again, if there are any other questions, or if anyone wants to stick around once Shannon kind of officially wraps us up and closes us, I'm happy to stay on and talk through anything, answer anything that I may be able to, with the caveat that there may be some, just like Mary's question, that I do need to look into, because I want to make sure I give accurate information and not kind of just information based off of my perspective.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any additional questions, but like Dan said, you're welcome to email travelingowls@rice.edu, and I can reach out to Dan if it pertains to him, or I can do a little research on my own. And either way, we'll make sure that we get you an answer to your question. You can also visit the Traveling Owls website at alumni.rice.edu/travelingowls to view our upcoming trips, including 8 hosted by Dan's company, Orbridge. I just want to thank everyone for taking time out of your day to spend with us, and we hope you enjoy the rest of Owl Together 2020. And we will stick around.
Have a great homecoming, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.